Hoover Dam is about to fail. Not the structure itself, something more fundamental. As of this morning, the water level at Lake Mead sits at 1,042.82 feet. If it drops just 7.8 more feet, 12 of the dam's 17 turbines will go dark. Power generation will not be reduced. It will be crippled, slashed by 70% overnight. That is not a worst-case scenario. That is not a climate model projection. That is what the director of Arizona's Department of Water Resources, Tom Bushotsky, confirmed in May of this year. His words, "We're going to go to 1,035. There's no question that's going to happen. And here is the part few people are connecting. Hundreds of miles north, a different lake is not just dying. It is actively becoming toxic." On July 8, 2026, a dust storm blew off the exposed bed of the Great Salt Lake, carrying arsenic into the suburbs of Salt Lake City. And a study has now confirmed that this poison is not just in the air. It is being absorbed into the vegetables people are growing in their own backyards. Two lakes. Two distinct crises. One appearing to be about power, the other about poison. But they are telling the exact same story. So what happens when the one thing connecting them is the one thing the American West has finally run out of? Here is the number you need to hold in your head. 1,035 feet. It is not an arbitrary line. It is a mechanical threshold built into the engineering of the Hoover Dam itself. A hydropower cliff. 12 of the dam's older turbines were simply not designed to operate with a water level below 1,035 feet. Once the lake crosses that line, they have to be shut down. Not throttled back, shut down. The dam's total generating capacity will plummet from 1,302 megawatts to just 382, a 70% reduction. Instantly, this is not a distant problem. This is an imminent reality. As of July 12, 2026, the lake is less than 8 feet away from that number. The Bureau of Reclamation knows it. The state water managers know it. The power distributors who depend on that electricity know it. The numbers are not moving in the right direction. An abnormally dry winter and record heat in March of 2026 meant the snowpack that was supposed to provide a buffer simply vanished. Some of it evaporated directly into the dry air, a process called sublimation. The rest melted into parched, thirsty soil that drank the water long before it ever reached the Colorado River. The runoff that feeds Lake Mead was a fraction of what was needed. The decline is not slowing. It is a documented, measured, and accelerating fact. The plan to fix this is not a solution. It is a Band-Aid. On May 21, 2026, the Bureau of Reclamation announced it would spend $52 million to upgrade 3 of Hoover Dam's turbines, making them capable of operating below the 1,035-foot threshold. 3. That still leaves 9 turbines that will go silent the moment the water line crosses that mark. It is an admission of defeat. A tacit acknowledgement that the lake level is going to fall, and that the best they can do is salvage a fraction of the power on the way down. The lights will not just dim in Las Vegas or Phoenix. In fact, those cities have diversified power sources. The real impact will be felt in places like Lincoln County, Nevada, a rural district that gets 70% of its electricity from Hoover Dam. For them, a 70% cut is not a line item in a budget. It means turning to the open market and buying expensive natural gas power, a cost that will inevitably be passed on to residents who can least afford it. A power shock rippling out from a dying lake. While Nevada watches its power supply dwindle foot by foot, Utah is facing a crisis you can taste. The Great Salt Lake, the largest saline lake in the Western Hemisphere, has been shrinking for decades. It hit its all-time historic low of 4,188.5 feet in November of 2022. It did not just get smaller. It exposed a vast, unnatural shoreline, a lakebed that was never meant to see the sun. This ground is not just dirt and salt. It is a toxic repository, a settling basin for a century of upstream mining and agricultural runoff. It is laced with heavy metals. Arsenic, uranium. For years, the primary concern was inhalation. Windstorms pick up these contaminants and blow them directly into the Salt Lake Valley, into a metro area of over 1 million people. Researchers have been documenting this for years. Then, on July 8th, 2026, it stopped being an academic concern. A massive dust storm tore through the valley. Dr. Kevin Perry, a professor of atmospheric sciences at the University of Utah, measured the aftermath. Particulate levels, PM10, reached 4 times the healthy limit. Arsenic was a major component of the dust cloud settling over homes, schools, and parks. Dr. Perry did not mince words about that day. "I would say that the dust event that we had yesterday is dangerous," he said. "It can send people to the emergency room. It can lead to heart attacks. People can die from that." Not a vague warning. A direct statement of medical fact. And here is the part that is entirely new. The part that elevates this from a respiratory hazard to something far more insidious. In April of 2026, a team of researchers led by Janice Bronny at Utah State University published a landmark study. They found that the toxic dust is not just settling on plants, it is being absorbed by them. Leafy vegetables like lettuce and spinach, grown in local gardens across the Salt Lake Valley, were found to have arsenic and other heavy metals incorporated directly into their plant tissues. You cannot wash it off. It becomes part of the food itself. The contamination is moving from the air, through the soil, and onto the dinner plate. The shrinking of the Great Salt Lake is not just creating a dust bowl. It is creating a scenario where residents could be slowly poisoning themselves with vegetables from their own gardens. An environmental catastrophe turning into a public health nightmare, one salad at a time. Farmington Bay and Bear River Bay, names that once just described parts of a lake, are now the names of toxic dust sources aimed directly at a major American city. So you have a failing dam in Nevada and a poisonous lake in Utah. They seem like separate disasters. They are not. They are two heads of the same monster. The cause is identical. And it is not just the mega drought. The drought is the accelerant, not the source of the fire. The real culprit is something far more deeply embedded in the economy of the American West. Alfalfa. Here is the number that connects everything. 79%. That is the percentage of all consumed water in the Colorado River Basin that goes to crop irrigation. 79%. Not to Bellagio fountains, not to suburban lawns in Phoenix. Agriculture, and of that, a staggering 70% is used to grow livestock feed. Hay, and most of all, alfalfa, a thirsty crop grown in the middle of a desert, often to be shipped overseas to feed dairy cows in other countries. The water being drained from Lake Mead, the water that is no longer reaching the Great Salt Lake, is being diverted upstream by the hundreds of billions of gallons to grow cattle food. That is the documented reality published by groups like Food and Water Watch in 2023. It is not a secret. It is a simple, brutal accounting of where the water actually goes. The Imperial Valley in Southern California holds the single largest legal entitlement to Colorado River water. It is a vast agricultural region, and its primary product is alfalfa. The water that should be flowing into Lake Mead to keep Hoover Dam's turbines spinning is instead being spread across desert fields to grow a crop that will be fed to animals. The water that should be flowing down the Bear River and other tributaries into the Great Salt Lake to keep its toxic bed submerged is being pulled out for the same reason. Upstream diversions for agriculture. It is one story, one massive regional misallocation of a finite resource, playing out as two seemingly separate crises. A system built on the assumption of infinite water is colliding with the reality of a multi-decade drought. The cities have actually gotten remarkably good at conservation. Per capita municipal water use has fallen dramatically in places like Las Vegas. But urban conservation is a drop in a bucket that is being drained by a fire hose. A fire hose aimed squarely at desert farmland growing animal feed. To understand the mechanics of the collapse, you have to look at the relationship between the two great reservoirs of the Colorado River. Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Lake Powell sits upstream, formed by the Glen Canyon Dam. For years, the two lakes operated in a fragile balance, a system codified in the 2007 interim guidelines. But that balance is broken. To save Lake Powell, the Bureau of Reclamation has been forced to sacrifice Lake Mead. Lake Powell is now hovering dangerously close to its own point of failure. The minimum power pool for Glen Canyon Dam is 3,490 feet. Below that level, the dam can no longer generate hydropower. As of July 11, 2026, the lake sits at 3,524.45 feet. That is just 34 feet of buffer, a catastrophically thin margin. To prevent Powell from hitting that shutdown threshold, the Bureau of Reclamation has been making a desperate choice. They have drastically cut the amount of water they release from Glen Canyon Dam downstream to Lake Mead. In a normal year, that balanced release keeps both systems stable, but this is not a normal year. By holding back water in Powell to protect its turbines, they are deliberately and knowingly starving Mead. They are forcing Lake Mead to absorb the deficit. To take the hit, every gallon held back in Powell is a gallon that doesn't arrive in Mead, pushing its own water level ever closer to that 1,035-foot cliff. It is a zero-sum game. A desperate act of triage, where saving one patient means hastening the decline of the other. And the choice has been made. Lake Powell will be protected at Lake Mead's expense. This decision is why Tom Bushotsky can say with such certainty that Mead will hit 1,035 feet. It is not just a prediction based on low rainfall. It is the direct, calculated consequence of a policy decision made hundreds of miles upstream. They are not solving the problem. They are just choosing which disaster happens first. And this is where the entire system enters a legal freefall. The rules are running out. The laws that have governed the Colorado River for the last 2 decades, the 2007 interim guidelines that dictated the balancing act between Powell and Mead, are set to expire at the end of 2026. In a few months, the 7 states that depend on the river, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico in the upper basin, and California, Arizona, and Nevada in the lower basin, were supposed to have negotiated a new set of rules for the post-2026 world. They failed. Completely. After years of meetings, proposals, and deadlock negotiations, they could not reach a consensus. The interests were too entrenched, the stakes too high. Who should cut? Agriculture or cities? The upper basin or the lower basin? The states with senior water rights from the 1920s or the states with booming modern populations? No one would budge. So on May 1, 2026, the lower basin states did something unprecedented. California, Arizona. And Nevada gave up on a full 7-state deal and submitted their own unilateral, short-term proposal to the federal government. It is a proposal born of panic. It offers about 1.25 million acre-feet in annual voluntary reductions, just enough to keep the system from crashing into dead pool, the point where no water can flow past the dams at all, for 2 more years, through 2028. It is not a long-term solution. It is a stopgap measure, a desperate plea to the federal government to impose some kind of order while they continue to argue. The old law is dying. There is no new law to replace it, and the states are now submitting separate, competing plans to manage the collapse. We are entering a legal and administrative abyss. 100 years of water law, built on the 1922 Colorado River Compact, an agreement drafted during one of the wettest periods in the last millennium, is vaporizing in the face of a hotter, drier reality. More water rights were promised than the river ever actually carried, even in good years. And now, the bill is coming due, and no one has a legally binding plan for how to pay it. The federal government, through the Bureau of Reclamation, is now running its own parallel process to decide what to do. An environmental impact statement that is not expected to be finalized until early 2027, after the old rules have already expired. The river is about to be flying blind. This crisis has been fed by a series of comforting illusions. The first illusion was that a good snowpack year could fix it. The winter of 2023 brought record snow to the Rockies. The reservoirs, including Powell and Mead, saw a temporary, welcome bump. It created a dangerous sense of relief, a feeling that the system had been saved. That moment lasted less than a year. The underlying water deficit was so profound, and the soil so parched from 2 decades of drought, that the system swallowed that one good year whole and kept dropping. The bump in 2023 was not a recovery. It was a brief pause in a relentless downward trend. The historically dry winter of 2025-2026 proved that one wet year is not a solution to a generational megadrought. The system's long-term trajectory has not changed. The second illusion is that the problem is profligate cities. Blaming Las Vegas for its fountains or Phoenix for its swimming pools is an easy narrative. It is also wrong. While urban growth is a factor, per-person water use in these cities has plummeted. Las Vegas, in particular, has become a world leader in urban water conservation, recycling nearly all of its indoor water and paying residents to rip out their grass lawns. The data is clear. The crisis is not being driven by showerheads or sprinklers. As a June 2026 report from a group of top Colorado River researchers, including former federal Representative Ann Castle, warned, urban conservation alone cannot fix this. The scale of the deficit is too large. They urged for what has long been the political third rail, permanent reductions in agricultural water use. Ann Castle stated it bluntly, "I think we need to have permanent reductions in use on the table, and agriculture will have to be part of that." It is not an attack on farmers. It is a recognition of mathematical reality. When one sector uses 79% of the water, that is the only place where cuts of a meaningful scale can be found. The third illusion is that the only choice is to bankrupt farmers, that ending alfalfa cultivation means destroying rural economies. Even here, there is nuance that gets lost. Researchers at Utah State University, the same institution studying the toxic dust, have been pioneering work on something called deficit irrigation. The idea is not to eliminate alfalfa, but to put it on a water diet. Studies from 2025 and 2026 have shown that by strategically withholding irrigation during the hottest parts of the summer, like July and August, farmers can force their alfalfa fields to go dormant without killing the crop. The plants survive, and the water savings are immense. It is a compromise, a way to cut water used dramatically without having to fallow every field. Programs are beginning to pay farmers to do exactly this, but they are small, piecemeal, and moving far too slowly to match the speed of the crisis. It is a potential solution struggling to scale in time. Meanwhile, the human cost of doing nothing accumulates daily. In Utah, the Great Salt Lake Strike Team, a coalition of researchers, including Commissioner Brian Steed, works to find ways to get more water to the lake. They released a report in January 2026 acknowledging stabilization efforts from the prior year helped, but they emphasized the lake remains dangerously below its minimum healthy level of 4,198 feet. As of early July, it sits at 4,191.1 feet, a 7-foot deficit that leaves vast tracts of that toxic lakebed exposed to the wind. They are studying things like the Newfoundland evaporation basin, looking for any possible way to conserve a few more drops. These are dedicated people fighting a war of inches against a problem measured in vertical feet of lake level and millions of acre-feet of water. What happens next is not a mystery. The trajectory is clear. Lake Mead will drop below 1,035 feet. It is not if, but when. Tom Bushatsky says it will happen. The Bureau of Reclamation's own projections from June 2026 might quibble about the exact month. Some say late August 2026, others mid-2027, but the outcome is the same. The turbines will shut down. The power will be cut. Legal challenges will fly as the old river compacts collide with new desperate realities. In Utah, more dust storms will blow. The work of Dr. Kevin Perry measuring the air and Janice Bronny measuring the food supply will become more urgent, more terrifying. The question is no longer whether there is a crisis. The question is how a modern society functions when its foundational resources, water, power, and safe food, begin to fail simultaneously. The story is not about two lakes. It is about one watershed, one interconnected system pushed past its breaking point. It is the story of a civilization that built an empire in the desert based on a 100-year-old water budget that was wrong from the very beginning. A budget written in a wet year that has now collided with 2 decades of dryness, heat, and an unshakable demand for a single thirsty crop. The cracked lakebed of the Great Salt Lake and the silent turbines of the Hoover Dam are not separate problems. They are the same monument to a system that has run out of time and run out of water. The laws that govern the river are evaporating. The plans to manage the decline are voluntary, provisional, and contested. And underneath it all, the water itself keeps disappearing, leaving behind a future where the only thing left to